as you can see, I've just put together some slides, effectively bookmarks, so that there's some structure to effectively what I'm going to talk about. You've already mentioned the chat function and the raise hand function and the Q&A at the end. So if you've got questions, use those facilities, and we'll try and catch up with all of them at the end. I think the most important part about furloughing and this categorization of furloughed workers that perhaps is being missed is that before this process applies, the most important thing is you review the employee contracts, you review the HR policies, you liaise with the HR providers, the lawyers, the solicitors, whoever it is that you have that looks after this particular area, because furloughing takes place after that. So if you've got other things, so if you've got people on paternity leave, sick leave, maternity leave, etc., all of those things come before this. Again, looking at the practical side of this, one of the key areas that appears to be getting missed is holidays. So a number of people have cancelled holidays. Obviously, we're all at home at the moment and can't go anywhere. If you have particularly a large amount of employees, or perhaps even very small skeleton employee pool, then you want to make sure that you're managing that between now and the end of the year. Having some sort of collaborative discussion about that is absolutely key at this point. We could reach Q4 of this year and you could be left with no employees because they're all looking to take their holidays at that point, if you don't consider this along with the contract point that I mentioned and before the furlough discussion. In terms of all of these points, I think it's really important to consider the fairness and the consistency that you're going to then have to take forward when you're having the furlough discussion. Having this pre-review, if you like, of contracts and holidays, hopefully you'll be able to get a message across to all of your staff that you want to be fair, you want to be consistent, and you want to make sure that everybody's working together to keep the organisation in existence, obviously, but going forward and working as it needs to work, not just over the next few weeks, but over the remainder of the year and next year, as was previously mentioned in the other conversations we've had on here. To get that point across as a part of some form of HR communication or staff communication, I think is absolutely key before the furlough discussions then take place. Furloughed workers and the furlough scheme. So in time-honoured tradition, it's the who, what, where, when, how, why. Effectively, this furlough scheme is, to all intents and purposes, a substitute for redundancy. The idea is that it gives you the opportunity to temporarily make employees redundant, as opposed to going to the final solution, as it were, of making them all redundant. So that is why it's the buzz phrase at the moment, and that is why it's in so much demand in terms of information. When does it apply from? So a lot of people have talked about this 1st of March 2020 date. So the idea behind that is not that you backdate all of your PAYE calculations and claim from the 1st of March 2020. What that means is, if as at the 1st of March you made some people redundant because you felt that the business couldn't support those people, you can effectively go back on that decision and furlough those people. If at that point they stopped work, then that is the backdating that can take place. Any other cessation of work since that date is effectively the furlough date. So in larger organisations, a furlough consultation, just like a redundancy consultation, would need to take place. You guys employing people would need to engage with the employees and talk to them about being furloughed, assess when that date is going to be. A number of people have had those discussions and effectively done that from the 1st of April. So if you've got hospitality type businesses, you can easily conclude that the day they shut the door is the day at which most of the staff were furloughed. But it is important that you evidence that date, and we'll talk about their duties, etc. Shortly. When you furlough somebody, you furlough them for 3 weeks. So it's a block of 3 weeks. It doesn't mean that at the end of that 3 weeks they are automatically returned to work. So you, in general practice, as part of the communication with staff, would furlough them until further notice. But for HMRC purposes, you are effectively doing that in blocks of 3 weeks. The selection of these people, I think, comes back to my fairness and consistency point. So you need to consider both the short term and the medium term, as well as the long term goals of your various different organisations to ascertain who it is that you're looking to furlough. You can't discriminate, as with any normal type of employment law. It's effectively looking at what these people can be doing or what they can't do at that moment for the business. In terms of how you then furlough these people, you're involved in this HR discussion, you make them aware of it. You are then assessing how much you can furlough. So this 80% that has been talked about with the £2,500 cap, that is the basis of the calculation. So in general terms, it will be, for a salaried employee, 80% of their gross usual earnings. If that figure is over £2,500, then it's capped at that figure. On top of that, you can claim within the grant from HMRC the proportion of their salary that relates to the employer's national insurance. This is limited to the £2,500 cap as well. And the employer cost of the auto-enrolment pension, the 3%. Again, that is limited to the 80% of their salary or the 2,500 cap. So it has been reported that the maximum that you can get from these grants is a 2,500. That is not correct. It's the 2,500 plus the proportion of the employer's national insurance and the proportion of the auto-enrolment figure. This government grant, effectively at the moment, the government portal is not in place. So you need to liaise with whoever it is that does your payroll. They will produce the figures as normal. You need to let them know whether or not you are topping up, which is effectively paying the extra 20%, and you will get no grant in relation to that. That is a decision for each of the employers individually. I would suggest that making that decision, you need to think about the possibility of having to furlough all of your staff. So if you're furloughing maybe one member of staff and it's not a significant cost at that particular point, you need to consider that in the future you may furlough more people, and you need to be fair and consistent on that basis going forward. So a decision now could cost you or the charitable organisations that you're in a lot more money further down the line. Once the government portal is up to date, there will be a submission that goes to that portal, and the money will come directly to the bank account that you've elected, and you will then effectively have that money. There is some confusion as to whether or not you need to wait for that funding or should wait for that funding until you pay the employees. Really, that's an employment law point. So if you're contracted to pay these employees weekly, fortnightly, monthly, then obviously you need to do that. If cash really is that much of an issue and you cannot fund it, then again, you're going to have to go back to the employees and explain that to them, and explain that you will pay them as soon as you process the wages and receive the government grant. But it is important that you adhere to the overall employment contract rules I mentioned at the beginning. And the why is this scheme in place? It's there to protect employees, and it's there to obviously benefit the employers and the business as a whole. And I think that needs to be brought into the discussions and communications that go to staff, so that they all know that you are working together in that respect. It's not been brought in for spurious claims. It's not been brought in to offset some costs. There are within the guidance, there are references to government-funded organisations. If you receive money specifically from the government that is funding employees and staff, then you cannot claim under furlough. This is predominantly in place in relation to NHS workers and similar types of government employees. But bearing in mind the audience, I think you do need to consider that and look at what income streams you have in relation to employees that you have on the books. Allowed activities. So you are allowed, all the employees are allowed to complete training while they're furloughed. The guidance around that, you just need to be careful around national minimum wage requirements. So if you've got apprentices or low paid employees who are completing training while they're being furloughed, then you would effectively have to pay them at the national minimum wage rate during that period. And volunteering, which is a hot topic. The guidance around furloughing is that these employees should not be working for your organisation. We don't know retrospectively what type of checks will go on, but based upon HMRC's usual course of action when it comes to PAYE investigations and the like, I think the key thing here would be illustrating that your policies and your communications can exhibit that these employees are no longer working for you while they're being furloughed. So examples that, practical examples that I would use would be they don't have access to emails, they don't have access to log in remotely and complete work. There is a furlough policy that effectively suggests to them that they cannot work, shouldn't be answering queries from customers, clients, donors, whatever it might be. This doesn't mean, in my view, that the odd email or the odd phone call to say, can you let me know where this is? I don't think they will go to that extreme in any way, shape or form.
Stuart, just I'm keen to leave time for questions. So if you're able to wrap up in the next minute or two, that'd be great.
And then the volunteering side, as long as they're not volunteering for you and they're volunteering for other people, and it's very clear that there's no benefit to your own organisations, then I see that as very clear. Looking at the other options or the other issues, government funding, use of other funding, use of all the talk about the directors, I don't think we need to worry about. But if you do have bigger organisations, charitable organisation with directors involved, they can be furloughed. New guidance came out on that a couple of days ago. And within here, the links for all the various different guidance, which I can send round and everybody can access. That was it.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And sorry to cut you off, because it's important, an important area, and we've got questions starting to come in, I've seen already. If you have a question you want to raise verbally, there is a facility to raise your hand in the participants list. But looking at some of the initial questions that came in, one I know was on the NHS volunteering scheme. We are still waiting to hear details about that, how that's going to work. But there is a lot of agreement in Oxfordshire that we will want to use the volunteers that come through that scheme through the existing volunteer schemes that are working very well across the county, because we don't want to be duplicating, and that we've got good systems in place already. Furloughed staff and volunteering, I think that's been pretty clearly answered by Stuart. And just looking through the comments now, there's a Facebook group on furloughing and fundraisers, which is recommended. We have a question there about annual leave whilst on furlough leave, and then is pay 80% or 100%. Stuart,
yeah, I can cover that. So effectively, people can take holidays during their furlough period. if they take holidays, they're effectively at work, which means that it wouldn't be counted as a furlough day. So they would effectively get that at 100%, and you wouldn't get the grant for that particular day, as it were.
Thank you. And you mentioned the need to try and manage holidays, and I know of some organisations who are saying staff have to have taken a certain number of days by a certain date in the year, so that they don't end up with a huge backlog of staff. I can see Emmy from UpT is saying that's what they're doing there, which makes a lot of sense. So you're getting people to spread their leave out through the year. Interesting question. Can you do the same job for another organisation, effectively job swapping? So if you have two furloughed staff in organisation A and organisation B, can they job swap effectively? That feels not in line with the spirit of the scheme.
I think if it was effectively manoeuvred for that to be the case, then I think you would be opening yourself up to a challenge and some potential penalties down the line. I think, as you say, if somebody, an individual, has skills, gets furloughed by one employer, and then is taken on to utilise those skills for another employer, then they are allowed to do that. The furloughed money is taxed in both organisations. So obviously that the employee would be feeling the extra tax liability in the other employment. So it doesn't make it necessarily as appealing as it's suggested in the question, maybe.
Thank you. 2,500, is that gross or net?
It's gross. So if you've got somebody who earns 3,000 gross per month, the cap is 2,500 gross.
Thank you. Some recommendations to get staff doing training.
Training. So the question there about training and loosely benefiting the organisation, they can do. So if you paid for the training, and it was related to the employment, then that is fine. It doesn't have to. The training doesn't have to be not work related. It's the volunteering and the other work associated duties that they cannot complete. The training can relate to the work.
And just to say, happy to take questions for Jane or Pat if people have questions for them. Would it be fair for a smaller organisation to have a deal with a larger one so that they could furlough their staff with instructions that they should volunteer for a larger organisation? I suppose that's, can you direct your furloughed staff to some degree as to what they should do?
Yeah, I think that's, Jane and I talked about this yesterday. I think somebody mentioned in here that there was a furlough group on Facebook. I think that sort of informal organisation or facilitation is best, rather than trying to direct people as an employer, because it could be seen that you're trying to benefit your employer in some way, shape or form by doing that.
Thank you. I think that's covered all the things that have come up in the chat box. If it doesn't, then do put your hand up and raise the issue. Or if you have another question that hasn't been addressed, do put your hand up. Otherwise, we've got 1 or 2 minutes left. We will share the information from today, the video, and if you have questions, we will be repeating these sessions on a weekly basis, and do keep the conversation going. What is the time frame for starting the conversations about furloughing before actually furloughing staff?
For me, I think the sooner that you start that conversation about the impacts on the various different organisations, the better. Making people aware of what your overall plan is, what other contingencies you've got in place, and mentioning that you're considering furloughing, I think is good, because it's that transparency that then leads, hopefully, to you giving a view of fairness when it comes to those types of decisions. Everybody should be aware that furloughing is being considered. I I think earlier the better.
Yeah. And final question here. Oh, two questions then. So one quick question on, is keeping your employees up to date, engaged whilst furloughed allowed through Zoom meetings, etc.? I would read your guidance as saying that yes, if it's a reasonably limited engagement. Stuart, is that?
Yeah. I think the key is, so if I take a proper example, I think engaging with the staff outside of work in a sort of more social environment and keeping them up to date with what's going on in the business is perfectly acceptable. If you can, as I said before, prove that they're not working by taking away sort of email access and all those sorts of things, but have regular catch-ups scheduled on Zoom on a sort of social level that includes them in the loop, as it were, then that's absolutely fine.
Great. And then final question then from Kira at OCVA. I think you're unmuted, so do you want to speak?
Yeah, okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, it was really just to say, well, what happens at the end, or can you just unfurlough staff? A couple of people have asked in the charity sector, whilst they're upskilling or getting their systems ready to be fit for work, they've furloughed their staff. But I just wonder, do the staff have a right to be not unfurloughed and to stay furloughed? How does that dialogue go?
The process of furloughing, you're effectively promising them that they can come back to work, so you're not making them redundant. So they continue all of their normal employment rights and all of those things. There would be a notification, so you'd notify them that they were coming off furlough, and which would obviously be after this 3-week block. You would make them aware that they're coming off furloughing, and they would come back at that point that you decide back onto the payroll as normal. Linking in with the holiday point as well, it's worth considering that depending on the size of your organisations, it might be that you want to manage the holidays so that you have people coming back on a staged period of time. So you don't necessarily want everybody coming back all the same day. So that's worth considering, but it's within you as an employer's realm of agreement as to when you then bring those people back.
Thank you very much, Stuart.